Karoline Leavitt wasn't always the name everyone talked about. She started her career just like any other young journalist, eager, curious, and full of dreams to make a difference in the world. But there was something special about Karoline. Unlike many others who simply reported the news, she had a knack for digging deeper. She didn't stop at surface-level facts. Instead, she followed every lead, no matter how small or complicated it seemed. Her determination to uncover the truth set her apart early on. It all began when Karoline stumbled upon a story that most people would have ignored. A tip came her way about a big corporation secretly siphoning money into offshore accounts. At first glance, it sounded like another boring financial scandal, but Karoline knew better. She spent weeks going through piles of documents, connecting dots, and speaking to insiders who were too scared to come forward publicly. When her report finally aired, it sent shockwaves across the country. People were outraged. Lawmakers demanded investigations, and the CEO of the company ended up behind bars. That moment marked the beginning of Karoline's rise as someone unafraid to challenge the powerful. But fame has its price. As Karoline continued exposing corruption, she made enemies. Dangerous ones. Wealthy businessmen, politicians, and even judges started seeing her as a threat. They tried to silence her with threats, smear campaigns, and legal battles, but nothing worked. If anything, these attempts only fueled her resolve. For Karoline, journalism wasn't just a job, it was a mission. And she believed that holding people accountable was the cornerstone of democracy. One day, while working on what seemed like a routine investigation into judicial misconduct, Karoline uncovered something shocking. Hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and secrecy was evidence linking a well-known judge to organized crime syndicates. The judge's name was Harold Grayson, a man respected by some and feared by many. Known for his stern attitude and strict courtroom demeanor, Grayson had built a reputation as someone untouchable. Many lawyers whispered about favoritism in his rulings, but no one dared to take him on, until now. Karoline couldn't believe what she was looking at. Bank records, emails, and testimonies from anonymous sources painted a horrifying picture. Judge Grayson wasn't just bending the rules, he was outright breaking them. Over the past 20 years, he had allegedly accepted bribes totaling over $50 million. These bribes influenced major court decisions, allowing criminals to walk free and innocent people to suffer unjustly. It was a betrayal of everything the justice system stood for. At first, Karoline hesitated. Taking on someone like Grayson wasn't just risky, it could be dangerous. He had connections everywhere, including law enforcement and government agencies. Going after him meant putting herself in harm's way. But then she thought about the victims, the families torn apart because Grayson sold justice to the highest bidder. She thought about the principles she had sworn to uphold as a journalist. And most importantly, she thought about the future. What kind of society would they live in if people like Grayson were allowed to operate freely? Determined to bring him down, Karoline assembled a team of trusted colleagues and experts. Together, they pored over mountains of data, verifying each piece of evidence meticulously. They interviewed whistleblowers who risked their lives to speak out. One source, a former clerk in Grayson's chambers, revealed how the judge used coded language in emails to arrange meetings with shady businessmen. Another insider provided access to secret bank accounts in places like Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. Each new discovery added weight to the case against Grayson. As the investigation progressed, Karoline realized this wasn't just about one corrupt judge. It was about exposing a rotten system. Judges are supposed to be pillars of fairness and integrity, yet here was Grayson, using his position for personal gain. The more she learned, the angrier she became. How could someone entrusted with such immense power abuse it so recklessly? And why hadn't anyone stopped him sooner? Finally, after months of relentless work, Karoline felt ready to act. She decided to file an $800 million lawsuit against Judge Grayson. The amount wasn't arbitrary. It represented the estimated value of the harm caused by his actions. From wrongful imprisonments to ruined businesses, the ripple effects of his corruption were staggering. Filing the lawsuit was a bold move, one that grabbed headlines overnight. Reporters swarmed around Karoline asking questions about her motives and whether she truly believed she could win. Her answer was simple. "I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for everyone who deserves justice." The announcement sent shockwaves throughout the nation. Some praised Karoline for her bravery, calling her a modern-day hero. Others dismissed her as reckless, warning that taking on someone like Grayson was suicide. But Karoline didn't care about the criticism. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but she also knew she couldn't back down. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a fight for accountability, transparency, and the soul of the justice system. Little did anyone know, the lawsuit would spiral into something far bigger than anyone anticipated. Judge Grayson, once confident in his invincibility, suddenly found himself cornered. The pressure mounted as federal investigators joined the fray, combing through decades of cases he had presided over. Meanwhile, public outrage grew louder, with protests erupting, filing outside courthouses and calls for reform echoing across social media. For Karoline, this was only the beginning. She had ignited a firestorm, and there was no turning back. Every step forward brought new challenges but also renewed hope. Justice might seem distant, but Karoline was determined to prove that even the most powerful figures could be held accountable. And as the process sped up, one thing became clear. Judge Grayson's days of hiding behind his robe were numbered. The hunt for Judge Harold Grayson became a global pursuit, capturing the attention of millions. What had started as a national scandal in the United States now transcended borders, turning into an international manhunt. Karoline Leavitt found herself at the center of this whirlwind, leading not just a legal battle but also a moral crusade. The stakes were higher than ever, and every move she made brought her closer to either vindication or heartbreak. With Interpol's red notice issued and Argentine authorities alerted, Karoline's focus shifted entirely to tracking Grayson down. She knew that finding him wouldn't be easy. Argentina was vast, its cities sprawling and diverse, with countless places where someone like Grayson could disappear. But Karoline wasn't deterred. She poured all her energy into piecing together clues, working tirelessly alongside investigative teams from multiple countries. Her determination inspired others to join the cause, creating a network of supporters united by a shared desire for justice. One of the biggest breakthroughs came unexpectedly. A disgruntled former associate of Grayson's, a man who had once helped him launder money through offshore accounts, reached out to Karoline. This insider, whose identity remained anonymous for safety reasons, provided critical information about Grayson's whereabouts. According to the source, Grayson had taken refuge in a secluded estate near Buenos Aires, hidden away from prying eyes. The property was surrounded by high walls, guarded by armed men, and protected by corrupt local officials who ensured his anonymity. This revelation reignited hope among those pursuing Grayson. For Karoline, it felt like the first real step toward justice since he fled the country. She wasted no time sharing the intel with Argentine law enforcement, urging them to act quickly before Grayson could relocate again. However, convincing authorities to raid such a heavily fortified location required more than just evidence. It demanded diplomacy, persistence, and unwavering resolve. Karoline worked closely with lawyers and diplomats to ensure that the operation would proceed without delay. While waiting for the authorities to mobilize, Karoline continued digging deeper into Grayson's network. She uncovered connections between him and a shadowy group of financiers operating throughout South America. These individuals weren't just wealthy businessmen, they were part of a sophisticated web of corruption that spanned continents. Through encrypted communications intercepted by investigators, Karoline learned that Grayson had been communicating with these financiers, planning his next moves. He believed he could live out his days in luxury, shielded by their influence and resources. But Grayson underestimated one thing: the power of public outrage. As news of his escape spread globally, people demanded answers. Protesters gathered outside embassies calling for accountability. Social media campaigns gained momentum, with hashtags like Dawson Bring Back Grayson trending worldwide. Even celebrities and influential figures joined the conversation, amplifying Karoline's message. The pressure mounted on governments to take action, making it impossible for anyone to ignore the situation. Amidst the chaos, Karoline faced new challenges. Her relentless pursuit of Grayson put her in harm's way. Threats escalated, her car tires were slashed, strange packages arrived at her doorstep, and shadowy figures began tailing her wherever she went. Despite these dangers, Karoline refused to back down. She hired private security to protect herself and doubled down on her efforts, determined to see this through. Every threat only strengthened her resolve. "If I stop now," she told herself, "then everything we fought for will have been for nothing." As weeks passed, the investigation gained traction. Investigators traced financial transactions linked to Grayson's estate, confirming his presence there. They also identified key members of his inner circle, some of whom were arrested during raids in other parts of the world. Each arrest brought them closer to dismantling the entire network of corruption surrounding Grayson. Slowly but surely, the noose tightened around him. Finally, after months of preparation, Argentine authorities launched a coordinated raid on Grayson's estate. It was a tense operation, carried out under the cover of darkness to minimize resistance. Helicopters hovered overhead, casting bright spotlights onto the compound below. SWAT teams breached the gates, overwhelming the guards stationed there. Inside the mansion, Grayson was caught off guard. Dressed in pajamas and clutching a briefcase filled with cash, he surrendered without a fight. When images of Grayson being led away in handcuffs appeared online, the world erupted in celebration. People cheered, cried, and hugged strangers, overwhelmed by the realization that justice had finally caught up to him. For Karoline, it was a moment of triumph mixed with exhaustion. She had spent years chasing this man, risking her safety and reputation to expose the truth. Now, standing in front of cameras as reporters bombarded her with questions, she felt a profound sense of relief and gratitude. Gratitude for her team, her supporters, and everyone who had believed in her mission. However, capturing Grayson was only half the battle. The next phase involved extraditing him back to the United States to face charges. This process proved challenging, as Grayson's lawyers argued that he should remain in Argentina, citing alleged flaws in the extradition request. But Karoline and her allies refused to let bureaucratic hurdles stand in the way. They rallied international support, pressuring both governments to prioritize justice over politics. After weeks of negotiations, an agreement was reached. Grayson would be sent back to the U.S. to stand trial. During this time, Karoline reflected on the broader implications of the case. This wasn't just about punishing one corrupt judge. It was about exposing systemic failures within the justice system itself. Judges are supposed to uphold fairness and integrity, yet Grayson had exploited his position for decades, leaving countless lives shattered in his wake. His capture served as a stark reminder that accountability is essential, regardless of how powerful someone may seem. Public sentiment mirrored this sentiment. Calls for reform echoed across the nation, with lawmakers introducing bills aimed at increasing transparency within the judiciary. Grassroots movements pushed for stricter oversight and greater protections for whistleblowers. Karoline became a symbol of change, inspiring others to speak out against corruption and demand better from their leaders. As preparations for Grayson's trial began, Karoline turned her attention to supporting the victims of his crimes. She organized town hall meetings, inviting people to share their stories and seek closure. Many expressed anger, pain, and frustration, but also hope. Hope that their voices mattered, that justice was possible, and that the future could be brighter than the past. Karoline listened intently, knowing that healing would take time but believing deeply in the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the progress, Karoline couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. While Grayson's arrest marked a significant victory, she knew that corruption didn't exist in isolation. There were others like him, powerful individuals operating in the shadows, exploiting loopholes, and manipulating systems for personal gain. Her work was far from done. Yet as she looked back on everything she had accomplished so far, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Justice might be slow, messy, and imperfect, but it was worth fighting for. And so, As the world waited anxiously for Grayson's trial to begin, Karoline prepared for what lay ahead. She vowed to continue shining a light on injustice, no matter where it hid. Because in her heart, she knew one simple truth. When good people refuse to stay silent, even the darkest forces can be overcome. The lawsuit against Judge Harold Grayson quickly became the talk of the nation. It wasn't just another legal case. It was a battle for justice, integrity, and accountability. Karoline Leavitt's decision to file an $800 million lawsuit against one of the most powerful judges in the country sent shockwaves through every corner of society. People were stunned. How could someone like Grayson, who had spent decades presiding over courtrooms and shaping lives with his rulings, be accused of such blatant corruption? The allegations were explosive, and they demanded answers. Karoline's team worked tirelessly to build the strongest possible case. Every day brought new discoveries, documents that exposed secret bank accounts, emails that revealed coded conversations, and testimonies from whistleblowers willing to risk everything to speak the truth. One of the key pieces of evidence came from a former clerk in Grayson's chambers. This clerk, whose identity remained anonymous for their protection, described how Grayson would often meet with wealthy clients in private rooms after hours. These meetings weren't casual. They involved discussions about cases, payments, and favors. The clerk even provided copies of handwritten notes that detailed specific amounts of money exchanged for favorable verdicts. Another major breakthrough came when investigators traced millions of dollars funneled into offshore accounts under fake names. These accounts were linked directly to companies owned by Grayson's associates. Through meticulous research, Karoline's team uncovered a web of deceit so intricate that it seemed almost impossible to unravel. But unravel it they did. They found proof that Grayson had used his position not only to enrich himself but also to protect criminals tied to organized crime syndicates. For years he had manipulated the justice system, ensuring that dangerous individuals walked free while innocent people suffered unjustly. As word of these findings spread, public outrage reached fever pitch. Protesters gathered outside courthouses across the country, holding signs that read, "Justice for all" and "No more corruption." Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like "Expose Grayson" and "Hold them accountable." People demanded transparency and reform. Many saw this as more than just a single case. It was a wake-up call. If someone as influential as Grayson could allegedly abuse his power for decades without consequence, what did that say about the entire system? Judge Grayson, however, refused to go down without a fight. In public statements, he dismissed the allegations as baseless accusations designed to tarnish my reputation. He claimed that Karoline Leavitt was pursuing a personal vendetta and that her lawsuit was nothing more than a smear campaign. His lawyers argued that the evidence presented was circumstantial at best and completely fabricated at worst. To the outside world, Grayson appeared calm and composed, projecting an image of confidence. Behind closed doors, however, things were far from stable. Reports began surfacing about Grayson's growing paranoia. Friends and colleagues noticed changes in his behavior. He stopped attending social events, avoided public appearances, and became increasingly isolated. Sources close to him revealed that he spent hours on the phone with his attorneys, strategists, and financial advisors, trying to figure out how to navigate the mounting pressure. Some even claimed that he had hired private security teams to monitor his surroundings, fearing that someone might try to harm him. Despite his outward defiance, cracks were starting to show in Grayson's carefully constructed facade. Federal investigators intensified their efforts, combing through decades of cases he had overseen. They interviewed witnesses, reviewed transcripts, and analyzed patterns in his rulings. What they found painted a damning picture. Time and again, Grayson had ruled in favor of wealthy clients or corporations accused of criminal activity. In some instances, he had outright dismissed charges against defendants with questionable backgrounds. These decisions hadn't been random. They followed a clear pattern of favoritism and bias. Meanwhile, Karoline faced challenges of her own. While the public largely supported her, she also became a target for criticism and hostility. Some accused her of sensationalizing the story for attention, while others questioned her motives. Online trolls launched vicious attacks, spreading false rumors about her personal life and career. Strangers sent threatening messages, warning her to drop the case or face consequences. Her home was broken into twice, though nothing was stolen. Just enough to send a chilling message. Yet none of this deterred Karoline. If anything, it strengthened her resolve. She knew that taking on someone like Grayson wouldn't be easy. She understood the risks involved, but she also believed deeply in the importance of her mission. This wasn't just about exposing one corrupt judge. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. Karoline reminded herself daily why she had chosen this path. She thought about the families torn apart by wrongful convictions, the businesses destroyed by unfair rulings, and the countless lives impacted by Grayson's alleged corruption. To keep the momentum going, Karoline decided to share parts of her investigation with the public. She gave interviews to trusted journalists, wrote opinion pieces for major newspapers, and appeared on television shows to discuss the case. Each time, she emphasized the need for systemic change. "This isn't just about Judge Grayson," she said during one interview. "It's about holding everyone accountable, no matter how powerful they are. We can't let fear or intimidation stop us from fighting for what's right." Her words resonated with millions of people. Donations poured in to support her legal battle, and volunteers joined her cause, offering their skills and resources. Grassroots movements sprang up across the country, organizing rallies and petitions demanding justice. Even lawmakers took notice, introducing bills aimed at increasing transparency within the judicial system. For the first time in years, there was a sense of hope, a belief that change was possible. But as the lawsuit process accelerated, tensions escalated. Grayson's lawyers filed motions to delay proceedings, arguing that the case lacked sufficient evidence. They attempted to discredit witnesses and challenge the authenticity of documents. Every step forward felt like 2 steps back. Yet Karoline remained steadfast. She knew that winning this case wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that giving up wasn't an option. Little did anyone realize, however, that Judge Grayson was already planning his next move. As the walls closed in around him, he began exploring ways to escape the inevitable. He reached out to old allies, tapped into hidden networks, and made arrangements that would allow him to disappear without a trace. For Grayson, fleeing the country wasn't just a last resort. It was a calculated strategy to avoid facing the consequences of his actions. For Karoline, the stakes had never been higher. Bringing Grayson to justice wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It was about proving that no one was above the law. And as the world watched, waiting to see what would happen next, one thing was certain: the fight was far from over. The trial of Judge Harold Grayson was unlike anything the United States had ever seen. It wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a spectacle, a reckoning, and a moment of truth for the entire justice system. For months, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation as lawyers, witnesses, journalists, and citizens gathered to witness history unfold. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse. Reporters jostled for interviews, and protesters held signs demanding accountability. Inside, Karoline Leavitt sat quietly in the front row, her expression calm but resolute. This was the culmination of years of relentless effort, sacrifice, and courage. From the very first day, the prosecution laid out its case with precision. Evidence piled up like bricks in a wall, each piece reinforcing the narrative of corruption that had brought Grayson to this point. Bank records showed millions of dollars flowing into offshore accounts under fake names. Emails revealed coded conversations about bribes and favors. Testimonies from whistleblowers painted a vivid picture of how Grayson manipulated the justice system for personal gain. One former clerk described watching him accept envelopes stuffed with cash after private meetings with wealthy clients. Another insider recounted being pressured to alter court documents to favor certain defendants. Each detail added weight to the charges against him. Grayson's defense team fought back fiercely, attempting to discredit the evidence and cast doubt on the credibility of witnesses. They argued that the documents were forged, the testimonies coerced, and the entire lawsuit politically motivated. At times, their arguments seemed convincing, sowing seeds of uncertainty among jurors. But the prosecution countered with irrefutable proof, leaving little room for reasonable doubt. Every attempt by Grayson's lawyers to poke holes in the case only highlighted the overwhelming strength of the evidence against him. As the weeks dragged on, public interest in the trial grew exponentially. People tuned in to live broadcasts, read updates online, and debated the details passionately. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags like Justice for All and End Corruption Now. Schools organized discussions about ethics and accountability, while community groups hosted events to educate people about systemic issues within the judiciary. The trial became more than just a story. It sparked a national conversation about fairness, transparency, and trust in institutions. For Karoline, sitting through the proceedings was both exhilarating and exhausting. On one hand, she felt vindicated, as piece after piece of evidence confirmed what she had suspected all along. Grayson was guilty. On the other hand, hearing the full extent of his crimes firsthand was deeply unsettling. Stories poured in from victims whose lives had been destroyed because of his actions. A mother tearfully recounted how her son had been wrongfully imprisoned due to a biased ruling. A small business owner described losing everything when Grayson dismissed fraud charges against a corporate giant. These testimonies reminded Karoline why she had started this fight in the first place, and why she couldn't afford to lose now. Despite the mounting evidence, Grayson maintained his innocence throughout the trial. Dressed in tailored suits and flanked by high-powered attorneys, he projected an image of confidence and defiance. During cross-examinations, he answered questions calmly, often deflecting blame onto others or claiming ignorance. Yet there were moments when cracks appeared in his facade. When confronted with undeniable proof of his wrongdoing, his composure faltered, his voice wavered, his hands trembled, and his eyes darted around the room nervously. These fleeting glimpses of vulnerability made it clear, even someone as powerful as Grayson couldn't escape the weight of his own lies. Finally, after months of testimony, closing arguments began. The prosecution delivered a searing indictment of Grayson's conduct, painting him not just as a corrupt judge, but as a betrayer of public trust. "This isn't about one man," the lead prosecutor declared. "It's about sending a message to anyone who thinks they can abuse power without consequence. Justice must prevail, not just today, but every day." The words resonated deeply with everyone present, drawing spontaneous applause from spectators. When the jury retired to deliberate, tension filled the air. Days passed agonizingly slowly as they reviewed mountains of evidence and debated the verdict. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, speculating endlessly about the outcome. Supporters held candlelight vigils praying for justice. Critics warned that if Grayson walked free, it would embolden others to exploit the system. The nation held its breath, waiting for the decision that would define an era. Then finally, the verdict came. As the foreperson stood to announce the jury's findings, the courtroom fell silent. "Guilty," they said, their voice steady and clear. Cheers erupted immediately, echoing through the halls and spilling onto the streets outside. Tears streamed down faces as people hugged strangers, overwhelmed by the realization that justice had been served. For Karoline, it was a moment of pure triumph. She allowed herself a rare smile, knowing that her hard work had paid off. This wasn't just a victory for her, it was a victory for everyone who believed in fairness and accountability. Judge Grayson was sentenced to life in prison without parole, ensuring that he would never wield power again. In addition, he was ordered to forfeit all assets tied to his illicit activities, amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars. The funds were earmarked for compensating victims and funding reforms aimed at preventing future abuses of power. For many, this marked the end of a dark chapter, but also the beginning of a brighter future. In the aftermath of the trial, Karoline became a household name. She was celebrated as a hero, invited to speak at conferences, universities, and government hearings. Her story inspired countless others to stand up against corruption, no matter how daunting the odds. Grassroots movements gained momentum, pushing for sweeping changes in the justice system. Lawmakers introduced bills to increase transparency, strengthen whistleblower protections, and impose stricter penalties for misconduct. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Yet despite the accolades, Karoline remained humble. She knew that the fight wasn't over. While Grayson's conviction sent a strong message, she understood that true reform required sustained effort. Corruption didn't disappear overnight. It thrived in shadows, lurking where people least expected it. That's why Karoline vowed to keep fighting, using her platform to shine a light on injustice wherever it existed. Whether it was exposing unethical practices, advocating for policy changes, or mentoring young journalists, she refused to rest on her laurels. Looking back on everything she had endured, Karoline felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought about the late-night investigations, the threats, the moments of doubt, and realized that none of it had been in vain. Through sheer determination and unwavering belief in the power of truth, she had achieved something remarkable. She had shown the world that even the most entrenched systems of power could be challenged and changed by ordinary people willing to take extraordinary risks. The legacy of the Grayson case extended far beyond the courtroom. It reminded society that justice is not guaranteed. It must be fought for, defended, and constantly improved upon. It underscored the importance of holding leaders accountable, protecting those who speak out, and fostering a culture of integrity. Most importantly, it proved that hope and resilience could overcome even the darkest forces. As Karoline walked away from the courthouse for the last time, she paused briefly to look back. The building loomed large behind her, a symbol of both failure and redemption. Then, turning toward the horizon, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. There was still so much work to do, and she was ready. The pressure on Judge Harold Grayson was mounting faster than anyone could have anticipated. What started as a scandalous lawsuit had now turned into a full-blown national crisis, with his name plastered across every news outlet and social media platform. For someone who had spent decades building a reputation as an unshakable figure of authority, the sudden collapse of his carefully constructed image was devastating. Behind closed doors, Grayson was unraveling. His confident public statements about the lawsuit being baseless masked a growing sense of panic. He knew that the evidence against him was damning, and he also knew that if he stayed in the country, it was only a matter of time before the law caught up with him. Grayson's paranoia reached new heights when federal investigators began raiding properties linked to his associates. One by one, people connected to him were questioned, their bank accounts frozen, and their assets seized. Some of them cracked under the pressure, spilling secrets they had sworn to keep. Others disappeared entirely, leaving Grayson with fewer allies to rely on. The once powerful judge found himself increasingly isolated, unsure of whom he could trust. Even his closest friends seemed to distance themselves, fearing association with someone accused of such egregious crimes. It was clear. The walls were closing in, and Grayson needed a way out. In the dead of night, Grayson made a decision. He couldn't stay in the United States any longer. Staying meant facing arrest, trial, and possibly life in prison. Escape, though risky, offered him a chance at freedom, or at least a chance to delay the inevitable. But fleeing the country wasn't as simple as hopping on a commercial flight. Grayson knew that authorities were monitoring his movements closely, so he had to act quickly and discreetly. With the help of a network of loyal associates, people who owed him favors or feared his wrath, he devised a plan to disappear without a trace. The first step was obtaining falsified documents. Using connections within his vast web of influence, Grayson secured fake passports and identification papers under different names. These weren't amateur forgeries. They were professional-grade documents designed to pass even the most rigorous scrutiny. Next, he arranged transportation. Instead of risking detection at a public airport, he booked passage on a private jet owned by one of his wealthy benefactors. The plane would fly him directly to Argentina, a country known for its reluctance to extradite individuals wanted by foreign governments. Everything was meticulously planned, down to the smallest detail. On the evening of his escape, Grayson packed lightly, carrying only essentials in a nondescript duffel bag. He wore plain clothes, avoiding anything that might draw attention. Before leaving his home, he destroyed sensitive documents and wiped his electronic devices clean. Then, slipping quietly out of his mansion through a side door, he climbed into a black SUV waiting for him in the driveway. The driver, a trusted associate, said nothing as they sped away into the darkness. Avoiding main roads and surveillance cameras, the SUV wound its way through quiet streets until it reached a secluded airstrip on the outskirts of the city. There, a sleek private jet stood ready for takeoff. Grayson boarded swiftly, settling into a plush leather seat as the engines roared to life. As the plane ascended into the night sky, he allowed himself a brief moment of relief. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. He was free, or so he thought. Back in the United States, chaos erupted when authorities discovered Grayson's disappearance. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras showed him boarding the private jet, but by the time they pieced together where he was headed, it was too late. The plane had already landed in Argentina, and Grayson had vanished into thin air. News of his escape dominated headlines, sparking outrage and disbelief. How could someone accused of such serious crimes simply slip away? Critics pointed fingers at systemic failures, accusing government agencies of incompetence. Others speculated that Grayson's escape had been orchestrated with inside help, further fueling conspiracy theories. For Karoline Leavitt, the news hit hard. She had poured her heart and soul into this case, determined to see justice served. To have Grayson flee the country felt like a personal defeat. Sitting alone in her office, surrounded by stacks of evidence and legal documents, she wrestled with frustration and disappointment. Had all her efforts been for nothing? Would Grayson ever face accountability for his actions? These questions weighed heavily on her mind, but Karoline wasn't the type to give up easily. If anything, Grayson's escape only strengthened her resolve. She reminded herself that this wasn't just about catching one man, it was about exposing the truth and ensuring that no one else could exploit the justice system the way Grayson had. With renewed determination, she vowed to track him down no matter how far he ran or how deep he hid. Karoline immediately shifted gears, focusing her energy on finding Grayson's whereabouts. She collaborated with international investigative agencies, leveraging her skills as a journalist to uncover leads. Her team scoured flight records, analyzed financial transactions, and interviewed sources with ties to Grayson's network. Every clue brought them closer to unraveling his plan. Meanwhile, Interpol issued a red notice for Grayson's arrest, making him a wanted man across the globe. The hunt was on. As days turned into weeks, Karoline faced new challenges. Tracking someone internationally was far more complicated than working within the confines of the U.S. legal system. Different countries had different laws, and navigating bureaucratic red tape became a constant struggle. There were moments when it felt like the trail was going cold and doubts crept in. But then, just when hope seemed lost, a breakthrough emerged. A disgruntled former associate of Grayson's reached out to Karoline, offering valuable information in exchange for immunity. This insider revealed that Grayson had taken refuge in a luxurious estate near Buenos Aires, protected by armed guards and local officials sympathetic to his cause. According to the source, Grayson believed he was untouchable, confident that his wealth and connections would shield him indefinitely. The revelation reignited Karoline's determination. She shared the information with Argentine authorities, urging them to act swiftly. Meanwhile, public support for Karoline surged once again. People rallied behind her, donating money, volunteering their expertise, and spreading awareness about the case. Grassroots movements organized campaigns calling for Grayson's capture, emphasizing the need for global cooperation to bring corrupt individuals to justice. Social media buzzed with hashtags like "Find Grayson" and "Join Justice Has No Borders." Karoline became a symbol of resilience, inspiring countless others to stand up against corruption. Despite the progress, danger lurked around every corner. Karoline received anonymous threats warning her to back off. Her car was vandalized and strange men began following her wherever she went. Yet none of this deterred her. She hired private security to protect herself and continued working tirelessly, driven by the belief that justice was worth fighting for, even at great personal risk. As the search intensified, Karoline often reflected on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about catching Grayson. It was about sending a message to anyone who thought they could abuse power without consequence. It was about proving that accountability transcended borders and that the pursuit of truth was a universal responsibility. Though the journey had been long and arduous, Karoline refused to lose sight of her ultimate goal, ensuring that Judge Harold Grayson faced the music no matter where he tried to hide. Little did anyone know, the final chapter of this saga was about to unfold. The world watched with bated breath, wondering whether justice would finally catch up to the fugitive judge, or whether he would succeed in evading it forever.